Good morning, everyone. Today, my topic. Oh,
You have to better wait a second.
Get in a hurry and forget.
okay. Good morning, everyone. Today, my topic is AP Stair Book. So let's talk about what's AP. AP is Associated Press. Currently, it's the world's single largest news organization, and there are more than 1 billion people reading, hearing, or seeing AP News daily. And the AP Stair Book was first published in 1977. So, what's AP Stair? AP Stair or Associated Press Stair. It is a standardized way of writing created and maintained by the Associated Press, a long-standing authority within the news world. And it's commonly accepted journalistic standards for usage, spelling, grammar, and punctuation. And it keep writing style easy to read and free of basis. And standardized style guide for most U.S. newspapers, magazines, and public relations firms. Finally, it helps our readers believe we are presenting information with thought and cares. So let's talk about abbreviation and economies. AP Stair holds that a few universally recognized abbreviations are required in some instances, and some other abbreviations are acceptable depending on the context, such as AARP means American Association or Retired Persons, and UFO means Unidentified Flying Object. But in general, as a writer, you should avoid having your writing appear as if it's an alphabet soup. Which means do not use abbreviations that your readers will not quickly recognize. Let's avoid alphabet soup. AP Stair holds that acronyms are formed from the first letters of a series of words. So what's the difference between abbreviations and acronyms? For example, let's say radar is formed from RA of radio, D of detecting, A of and, R of ranging. But GB is its abbreviation. That's a difference. And you should use abbreviation AD, BC, AM, PM number, and also certain months when used with figures. For example, at 10:30 p.m. Let's see this example. Why it's wrong? Because abbreviations are only accepted when used with figures. And abbreviation only the months January, February, August, September, November, and December. All months should be spelled out when used alone or with the year. For example, my birthday is in August. It's wrong. And AP Stair guidelines state that formal academic titles such as chairman, dean should be capitalized when they precede a name. But Stephen Jones is a professor at the local university. When you have modified such as department, in department, chairman Stephen Jones, they should be lowercase. And spell out generic parts of street names when no specific address is given. When a number is used, abbreviate avenue, boulevard, street, and directional parts of the street name. Abbreviate word, street, avenue, and boulevard only after number, address. Fourth, never abbreviate drive, highway, place. We always use fingers instead of spelling out H's. We use hyphens for H's that are used as objects before a noun or that substitute a noun. For example, Ren is 7 years old, and The 20-year-old boy is living with his grandparents. And we need to pay attention that when the contact does not require years or years old, the figure is presumed to be year. In writing, we use anonymous attribution only when essential and even then provide the most specific possible identification of the source. The basic guidelines for use of anonymous source: the matter must be information and not opinion, and it must provide information of significant value to the news report. And do not attribute information to source when it's obvious, common sense, or well known. Do not capitalize state, department, division, board, program, section, unless the word is part of the former name, such as the Water Quality Control Division server contacted the division. Capitalize common nouns such as party, river, and street when they are part of the proper name, and locate directional indicator expect when they refer to the specific geographic regions or popularized name for those regions, and capitalize formal titles that come directly before a name. Lowercase formal titles that appear on their own or follow a name, and never capitalize job descriptions regardless whether they are before or after a name. And we need to capitalize city if part of a proper name, an integral part of an official name, or a regular used nickname, such as New York City, City of Light, Fine City. And lowercase, the city government, the city of Boston. And capitalize when part of a formal title before a name, and lowercase when not part of a formal title. The countless title. The only time you should use countless titles such as Miss, Mr., Mrs. is in direct quotations or when the subject being discussed specifically requested. An example may be a woman who prefers to be known as Miss Johnson or Mrs. Johnson. Sometimes you may find it necessary to distinguish between two people who have the same last name, married couple. In cases of this, use the first and last name of each without any contest titles. And in the gender of the subject is not clear from his or her first name or from the context of the story. Indicate the gender by using he or she in the subsequent reference. In direction and regions, lowercase campus directions and capitalized regions. When referring to the name of a nation, directions should be lowercase unless they are officially part of the country's name. And the only exception to this is when you referring to widely known sections such as the south side of Chicago. If you are unsure, it's advised to use lowercase. An essential phrase and a non-essential phrase. Do not set an essential phrase off from the rest of a sentence by commas. Let's see this example. We do not use a comma in this sentence because many movies have won awards, and without the name of the movie, the reader won't know which movie the author meant. And do set off a non-essential phrase by commas, like this example. We do not use comma in this sentence because because Julie only have one husband. If the phrase reads, "and her husband David," it would suggest that he had more than one husband. And Capitalize the name of the specific foreign governmental agents and department, either with the name of the nation or without it if clear in the content. Lowercase the ministry or a similar term when standing alone. And month. Capitalize the name of the month in all uses. When a month is used with specific date, you may abbreviate January, February, August, September, October, November, and December. All remaining months should not be abbreviated. When a phrase uses only a month and a year, do not separate the year with commas. When a phrase refers to a month, day, and year, set off the year with commas. Abbreviate only if the month name is 6 letters or longer. And the proper name of the nationalities, people's race, should be capitalized, such as Chinese, and lowercase black, white, red, and lowercase derogatory terms such as honky. As for seasons, do not capitalize seasons unless they are a part of a formal name. And one exception to this rule is when the season appears in a proper name, such as I go to the Winter Olympic. Winter is capitalized every. I go to the Winter Olympics every 4 years. As for state, spell out the names of the state unless preceded by a city, country, or military base name. And for second reference, private or state name. Do not capitalize state when used simply as an adjective to specify a level of jurisdiction. And temperatures. Use figures for all except 0. Use a word, not a minute sign, to indicate temperatures below 0. This is right, and this is wrong. Temperatures get higher or lower, but they don't get warmer or cooler. So you say warm up is wrong. And time zones. We need to capitalize the full name of the time in force within a particular zone, such as Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight Time, and lowercase or, but the regions in short forms, such as Eastern Time. And the abbreviation are such as this are acceptable on first reference for zones used within the continental United States, Canada, and Mexico only if the abbreviation is linked with a clock reading. And times. When describing events that have occurred within a 7-day time period time of the writing of the story, it's acceptable to use days of the week, such as Monday. For any period of time beyond this 7 days, use a month and a figure for date, and use numerical figures except for noon and midnight. Use a colon to separate hours from minutes to keep time in lowercase. And spell out the units or measurement in this sequence. And because I don't have enough time to show all content in the AP Style book, so I choose something I think you may be something that I think important or you may be used in the future. So if you want to know more, please read this book because it's very useful in your writing practice. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, which one do you have? Okay. This one and
Good morning, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about basics of copy editing. First, is every journalist needs to be an editor, even if they never carry the title of editor. All journalists, at the very least, need to understand how to edit their own copy more effectively. Second, editing is an essential process of journalism. As journalists, no matter how proficient we are, we can always do better. What we produce probably is never perfect, and certainly not what we produce in our first job. You may frequently be a story's final judge and jury. As a professional editor, you would not just be changing misspellings, poor grammar, and bad punctuation. As an editor, you are not just allowed but expected to rewrite entire paragraphs. If necessary, you need to improve a story. Whether we are editing our own copy or someone else, the principles are essentially the same. First, read the copy as objectively and as distant as possible. Try to look at it as your most informed but critical reader's mind. If it's your own story, try to put it aside for a while before editing, so you can see it with fresh eyes. How long you can put it aside depends on your deadline and the circumstance. Second, look for contain errors that might cause your publication embarrassment or legal problems. Look for even the smallest errors in facts, punctuation, grammar, spelling, or style. What's unimportant to you may be extremely important to someone else. Next, be aware of bias, personal opinion, unclear attributed opinion. There are some tips. First, take no side, tell all side. It means that our text and visual stories need to reflect all sides, not just one. It requires us to stop at each stage of news gathering and ask ourselves, what do I know, and what do I need to know? Second, be on guard against bias in our choice of words. For example, word like calmed, crammed, and or according to can suggest we doubt what is being said. Word like fears or hopes might suggest we are taking sides. Avoid inappropriate reference to gender, ethnicity, religion, culture, appearance, age, and sexual orientation. Is it really novel that the person in the news is black, blonde, female, overweight, or gay? If it's indeed relevant, does the fact belong in the lead or should be woven in lower down? All of this we need to think over. Next, strive for brevity and simplicity. Trimming away the exercise is not as simple as I'm making sound. I bet you already know that. Here is an example from a famous writer, George Sanders. Imagine I have written the line, Jack came into the room in a huff and sat heavily upon the old green chair. What are we trying to say with this line? The only information relevant to the plot is that Jack is now in the room and possibly that he's sitting. So we can't trim the entire sentence because Jack's arrival might be important. But do we care how he came into the room or how he sat on the chair, or the details surrounding the chair? How much better is the sentence? Jack entered the room. it's clean and simple. Next, don't allow yourself to be so close to the story that you presume your readers share the same information or understandings. Even if many stories have been written on the topic, you cannot afford to presume your readers has read even one of the other stories, nor that he has possibly read all of them. In other words, the story should be reviewed background fully so that anyone would understand but not repeat so much old news as to bore the more informed readers. Next, watch for unjustified use of descriptions. Descriptors. Generally, it's better, more precise, and ultimately more accurate to describe without using superlatives such as best or worst or most, or even subjective adjectives such as pretty or wonderful. Instead, insist on factual, precise, verifiable detail and the description. Okay, here are some other principles. If you are interested, you can read it after class. And I have talked about some of them. Copy editing simples. Here are many editing marks. And if you want to promote your skills, you can Google editing marks quiz. There are many questions for you. It's my conclusion. Editing can be a chore. Just remember that the purpose of editing is always to make the story better, to make it easier for readers to relate to, and to help you improve as a writer. And my first question. The fire that happened yesterday made everyone sad. Is this description accurate? Anyone want to? Okay. No. Okay. Okay. Thank you. The answer is no. Because you cannot know everyone will be sad or not. Question 2. If many stories have been written on the topic, you can afford to presume your reader has read even one of the other stories. Is it true or false? Okay. False. You still need to give background, but not too much. As a professional editor, you will just be changing misspellings, poor grammars, and bad punctuation. Okay. As an editor, you are not just allowed but expected to rewrite entire paragraphs. If necessary, you need to improve a story. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to, the third presentation today will be delayed till next week. I'm going to go ahead and pass the attendance, and just in case anybody doesn't, needs to be aware of when they're supposed to present. We are in week 5 of the semester, so that means week 6 next week and on. I do not count our week break, so basically I skip over the week's break, so I don't count that as a week. So we're going otherwise in order. I didn't have a chance to complete everything I wanted to talk about in the lecture on Monday. I'm just going to cover a small piece that I've also covered in the other tutorials as well. So let me get to that, and then I'll be giving you time to share your stories with each other and play, be copy editors or content editors, a little bit of both, and help each other improve your stories. But I'm going to talk a little bit, as I said, about part of my slide presentation I did not get to the other day. So let me get to that. Be sure, if I can talk and look at the same time, which sometimes I have difficulty doing. Remember, in fact, that is kind of what I'm about to show you. Is I'm going to start go through the first part of your design critique sheet. And in fact, I'm not actually going to come to think about not going to use the PowerPoint. I'm going to go right into the critique sheet so we can see it a little bit better. One comment while I'm looking at this last presentation. There was a good example he provided from another source, which was good, about like the narrative of the guy coming into the room. That one. Let me bring this up. I would just make one exception to that. He's absolutely right that normally we're trying to be very brief. And so, so he's right to point out that this is not normal journalism to try to use a lot of description, as in the first sentence. And so in 99% of your writing, you would not be that descriptive. But there are some styles of journalism, for example, when you get to the descriptive lead or the narrative lead, those both are first off, probably going to be multi-paragraph, more than 2 paragraphs, because you're going into description. And you're doing it purposefully to help create the scene of something. For example, let's say, whenever that was 15 years ago, whenever the tsunami hit this area, and you were there. Well, you could go into a lot of detail describing what happened as the tsunami approached and hit the shoreline. Okay, that would be a descriptive lead that would be very appropriate and be very powerful, would be award-winning. So while it's only 1% perhaps of news stories, it does exist. A descriptive lead or a narrative lead goes into more detail purposefully because of such possible situations. It's not always a disaster, it could be something else, but something that you think would be greatly enhanced by helping the reader see it in their mind's eye. Then you go to a descriptive, and like I said, your lead might be 8 paragraphs long. or something, because you're going to a lot of description before you actually get to the news of how many people died or whatever. So that would be the exception, but this is certainly the rule for 99% of your stories. Okay, I'm going to bring up the design critique sheet. What I started to say a second ago is that for some reason, many of you do not read your critique sheets very carefully. Of all the things you should read, it would be your critique sheet. Now, I use critique sheets rather than rubrics because the critique sheets actually give more detail than the typical rubric can give. And so, to me, I want you to know very specifically how to get an A. That my critique sheets do not tell you how to get a D. I want to tell you how to get an A. And so they're very detailed on how to get an A. They are not very detailed on how to get a B or a C or a D. Because I'm not shooting at a B or a C or a D, I'm shooting at an A. So I want you to know how to get an A. Now let me, oh, I need to pause it. I'm sorry. I can't do two things at once. For example, do remember that you're supposed to have a Q&A at the end of your PowerPoints, at the end of your presentation. So many of the students are forgetting that, but that is on the critique sheet, and I've mentioned it probably at least a dozen times in class. I've mentioned it a lot in class. So I've mentioned it in class, and it's on the critique sheet. Also, be sure to, you're also supposed to, both presenters did give me today their handout. But in other classes, some have not. You are supposed to give me a handout so I can use it while I'm making, making my notes. So when you present, hand this to me before you present so I can take my notes. But also email me. I've made the mistake sometimes of saying, okay, I'll just make a copy of your, when you're done with your presentation, I'll make a copy of your PowerPoint. But the problem with that is then I don't remember where I left the copy sometimes. I'm in a hurry because we have another presenter or whatever. And it's easy for me to get distracted. And then thus, for that reason, over the weekend I asked people whose PowerPoints I could not find to just send them again. In some cases, I later did find them where I didn't remember putting them. So to me, I keep best track of stuff when it's in an email form. So if you have a question, if you need me to, need to ask me to do something, or you need to get me your PowerPoint, the best thing is to put it in an email. If it's in an email, I track my emails very carefully. I have a file system, so I know where I put my emails. I don't always, with 120 students asking me different stuff, I don't always remember stuff. Not just because I'm old, although that could be part of it, but because I have 120 students asking me different things. So I can't always keep track of it. So if you stay within my system, you're in pretty good shape. And I have a good system with my email. So all of you should, if not before your presentation, immediately after the presentation. I don't want to have to wait a couple of days because, again, I'm going through 4 tutorials, which means like this week I was supposed to listen to 12 presentations. So if somebody doesn't send me their PowerPoint for a few days, guess what? I'm out of my system. I'm not remembering, and I may have already, gone on to other stuff. Or if they need to update, say they didn't add their questions to it. Well, if they email me immediately with their questions that might raise their grade a little bit, even though they didn't have a chance to present their questions and answers to the students, at least they sent me a PowerPoint with questions in it. So it might help their grade a little bit, but also, I'm in the mode on the very day or next day of putting all the PowerPoints up on Moodle. And if I don't have all the PowerPoints, then they may not get put up to Moodle because I go on to something else because I have another class tomorrow with 40 students in it. And I have to worry about them tomorrow. So by the time I get done with my class tomorrow, I may have forgotten to, you send me a PowerPoint late, I may have forgotten and just kind of, I moved on, and so your PowerPoint may not get put up on Moodle at all, or unless you remind me or whatever. So try to stay in the system. With 120 students, I can't be concerned, how do I put it? There's my problems and then your problems. I need to worry about my problems. My problems are trying to juggle multiple classes and 120 students, and my research and everything else I do. Your problem is your problem. So if you don't do what you're supposed to do, I can't be responsible for your problem. You need to be responsible for your problem. So that's just the reality of it. I only have so much I can juggle at one time, and I can't juggle the problems of 120 students. That I can't do very well. Okay, so getting now to this critique sheet. This is perhaps your most important critique sheet in this course, because in this course, about 76% of your grade will come from what you do within the design production projects, including your final exam. Most of your final exam will be doing a tabloid design and all the things that relate to it, including headline writing, caption writing, if you need pull out quotes, how you choose and size and crop your photos, all the things that we're going to be learning during this semester are all encompassed within these design projects. So I may refer to them as design projects, but they are much bigger than design projects. They're headline writing projects. They're caption writing projects. They're involving everything that you're going to be doing as a copy editor if you're ever in that position. And so it's important that all those things, by the way, are in this critique sheet. So if I just go down real quick, you will see that the first part that I'm going to review today is the basic design appearance of a news page, worth about 25% of your grade. If we go down, I go into graphics. So this includes things like cropping. How do you crop your photos? How do you size your photos on the page? Did you select the photos right? Did you select a photo that have people's eyes shut or whatever, and doesn't look good for some reason? So did you put in captions when needed? So this all relate to your and other things that I'm not going to go through today about your graphics. Then headlines are about 25%, and there's some very precise rules here as to how to do your headlines. Some of those we went through briefly on Monday in the PowerPoint, but here they are. These are exactly the criteria for getting an A, is to know what I have in this critique sheet. And some of these things will also show up in quizzes and exams, by the way. So they're not just going to show up in your design projects. Again, 3 design projects plus the main part of your final exam will all be will be within this design environment. And so that's why this is so critical. Like I said, 76% of your overall grade between the 3 projects, that's 9% each, so that's 27, plus of your final exam, basically 40% of your overall course from the final exam is the design project on your final exam. So 40 plus 27, okay, so it's 67%, not 77, but 60, whatever I said, 67%. So it's important. So this is the most important critique sheet you have. Going down further, some rules about text, how to handle your text. And then finally, only 10% is the actual editing. But that might be increased in some cases where, for example, I might tell you I put errors into, particularly most likely in the final exam, I might put some errors in some of the stories you're using for your final exam. I may put them there on purpose, but maybe I might tell you in the first 4 paragraphs of each of your stories, there may be some errors. You are responsible for correcting the errors in the first 4 paragraphs. You won't have time to do everything, but if I give you 4 stories, you will have time to edit the first 4 paragraphs of 4 stories. And so I might do that. You should be prepared for that possibility. Some final exams I do that in. I haven't created my final exam, so I don't know whether I'm going to do it this time. But that's the sort of thing I might do. in which case, if I have some, add some specific editing element to the final exam, it might enhance from 10% to more because it's become now part of a final exam, not, so it has more importance to it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the top. I'm just going to cover the first part to give you an idea, some of the stuff that you need to have, and I will go into more detail in probably in the next lecture. I may quickly go through this part, but let me just give you kind of a quick idea of the sort of stuff I'm looking at. For you to get an A, you need to be doing all this stuff. I know there's a lot there, but this is how you become a professional. These are all the points you need to become a professional. So this critique sheet is very important for you. So just starting up at the top, number one is dominant graphics and headlines towards the top. So we went through that in the PowerPoint a little bit. It does not necessarily mean that the biggest headline has to be at the very top. Sometimes you may have a design where there's a lesser important story at the very top, but it's very thin, and so you very quickly get to the main story under that. That's okay as long as the dominant headline is in the top half of the page, at least that. It should be in the top half of the page. Also, the bulk of the most important photo should be at the top, should dominate the top part of the page. That doesn't mean it might extend into other in the lower part because some photos are quite large, and especially in some circumstances you might already have a smaller photo at the very top or towards the very top, and then your bigger photo just down just a little bit, and so it's going to overlap into the lower part. But probably I would say that more than half of your biggest photo, your center of focus, should be in the upper half of your page. And so kind of contrasting with that is number two is don't make your page bottom heavy. And so some of the worst of those sports pages we looked at, those 7 sports pages we looked at during the lecture, some of the worst ones had the main picture at the bottom of the page. So that's making the page bottom heavy. So where do your eyes go to? If you're the reader, where do your eyes go to immediately? To the bottom of the page. They may never go up to the top of the page. And so the main idea is that at least in English, not in all languages, I understand, but in English, we go from left to right, top to bottom. And so our eyes tend to start at the upper left, and they start winding down the page. But if you have your main art at the bottom of the page, then you throw the whole thing off. Your the reader's natural eye movements don't occur properly because they're looking at the main art at the bottom of the page. And as I said, they may never go back to the top of the page. If they read that bottom story with the main art, they may jump to another page, they may never come back again. So that's bad design. Your stories need to be modular. I don't know, this is a strange term, but I put /modular /rectangular, as I tried to explain several times. It just means every story, essentially, and I'll come back to the exception, every story is rectangular. It can be long rectangular, vertical, it can be wide rectangular, it can be square, but it's a rectangle somehow, and all those rectangles in your design fit together. There are, one exception might be if you have ads on your page and your ads are different levels. Well, the story above the different level ads might have to wrap around the ads. In that sense, it's not going to be rectangular because it's wrapping around ads. Well, that's not your fault. You can't do anything about the ads at that point. Somebody else put in the ads, you're going to have to wrap around the ads. So that's an exception. You might wrap around ads. The other exception is when you have 2 stories on one subject, or 3 stories in some cases. And then you create a package. And so you have a main headline across the top that covers all the stories, all the related stories in this package. And then each one has their own subheadline, for example. So, and there's a big piece of art that goes with all of them right in the center, perhaps. So you might have one story count coming down the left column and wrapping underneath the photo, one story coming down the right column and stopping even with the wrap so that you have a rectangle. So the package is rectangular, but it involves two stories that are related to each other. So that would be an exception. One of the most important rules is simply do not confuse your reader. I've had students, for example, similar to this design I just talked about, they have a story coming down the right column, and then when they get down a ways, they jump over to the left and go to column one, maybe all the way to column 1 or column 2 or column 3. That is not a natural eye movement. To jump from column 6 or in a broadsheet or column 4 in a tabloid and jump from there all the way to column 1 again. You don't we don't go to the left. And so don't confuse your readers. Also, one of the non-confusing, I'm going to jump down a second. Well, I guess it is the next story. The next item is keep your story under the headline. One reason to keep your story under the headline, in other words, if you have a tabloid, a 4-column story, your headline is 4 columns and your story is spread across 4 columns underneath it. So that's keeping your story underneath the headline. That's the natural way that newspapers do it. Almost, probably well over 80% of the stories are done that way. Headline over the story. And that is something that every reader expects. So when you break that, you also run into the possibility of confusing your readers. So I showed you the options of headline in the side saddle, where the headline's off to the side. Well, I also told you that you should, if you have a side saddle where your headline is not going over your story, then you should box the entire story, including the headline, the entire story. So if you can imagine in your mind, you have a story up at the top, let's say, and it has a headline over it, and so underneath it are, in a tabloid format, four columns of text. Right under that, you have this story with a side saddle. If you don't put a box on it, then suddenly the columns from the top story are coming very close to the columns in the second story, and there's no headline breaking them up. And so if they're too close, then the reader's trying to go from the first column, well, it wouldn't be the first column because your side saddle's over there, but let's say you get over to the third column or so, and they're reading the third column of the first story, and they try going down into the second story because they're all in one column, and there's nothing breaking them up except a little bit of white space. So white space is not enough when you're using a side saddle, and so there's lots of potential to, well, let me say it this way. I have seen some designs where all they left was white space, and they left enough white space that it was doable. But my rule would be simply don't even run the chance. I've had one student who designed so well that she could break the rules. One student in all the years I can remember, she broke rules, but she did so well that I had to look the other way. She was a better designer than I am. And so I kind of ignored when she broke the rules because she's so good at it. She never confused the reader. Again, she had enough white space and so forth. She used white space very well. But that's one of hundreds of students I've had. Don't expect to be that student, okay? And so for those of you who are not as good as this one student I had who's better than me, keep my rules and box the story that has a side saddle headline. And it relates to not confusing your readers. It also, well, let's just go on. Balance your graphics. 6 and 7 have to be taken kind of together. And maybe perhaps 7 should come before the 6 here. We've already talked about it. You want a dynamic flow around through your 4 quadrants of your page. And so your center of focus, your main photo, typically photo or art of whatever kind, should be in the upper part. The very best design would be upper left. Because again, eyes go left to right and up to down. So the ideal layout, it doesn't have to, we don't always do things exactly right or exactly best because it gets too redundant. So if you found the best layout and you use that same layout for every page, it would be boring. And so sometimes we do put the art to the upper right. We don't always put it at the upper left. But scientifically speaking, it would be best to have your best art at the upper left, and then have a smaller piece of art to the right, middle right, and then another piece of art to the lower left. So your eyes are going back and forth, and between the three pieces of art, you have your golden triangle, and there's art in all four quadrants. By the time some are splitting the middle of the page and so forth. So you have art in part of all four quadrants, and your eyes are going back and forth. So when I say balance, it's really in that context, is that you don't have no art to the right. You don't have all your art to the left or all your art to the right. You have some sense of balance, even though it's not a perfect balance, because you have your center of focus photo is bigger and it's on one side. So if you put a weight to them, it's going to be leaning one direction or the other by when you're using this golden triangle. But it has balance in the sense that you have art in all four quadrants. So it relates very close to the dynamics. There are some designs that do not have the golden triangle. We talked about a little bit, but maybe not real clearly in the lecture. For example, if you have one piece of art that totally dominates the page, it's in, say, it's the upper center, and it's coming down and goes into, basically that one piece of art is in all four quadrants of the page. So you have one really, really big piece of art dominating the page, you won't have room to have a golden triangle. And so that's a different type of design. And so you deal with that. You still don't leave any big gray areas in your page, which is one of the next items here. But it's because you have one piece of art so big that it's so dominant in the page, you don't have room for other art. But that's okay, because you've decided this art is so important that it's okay. You're going to use that one piece of art to dominate the page, and that one piece of art is actually in all four quadrants to some degree. Be careful about getting things too tight. For example, if you are boxing a story, don't let the text of your story touch the box. You're going to have to get that text box to inset a little bit, and we'll show you how to do this. But it's one of those things, kind of one of the subtle things of desktop publishing, how to get your text away from the graphic box. And so you'll have to pay attention. I still have lots of students at the end of the semester making mistakes with making things too tight between their headline and their graphic box and their text boxes. And they're, like I said, they're too tight, they're touching each other. You need a little bit of breathing space between all this stuff. Don't have headlines touching the text under it. Don't have the subheads touching the main headline. You just have to give a little bit of air to everything. Not too much, but not too little either. And usually where people get dinged is having too little space to where they are literally touching, or so tight that they might as well be. Avoid the gray areas, as I mentioned. That just means an area where there is no art on the page, and it's too big of an area. Just lots of text, lots of text, lots of text. Try to figure out how to break up that gray area. And we in looking at those 7 sports pages, I mentioned that there was one where there was art at the very bottom, and the 2 pieces of art at the very top, and in the middle was lots of gray. And so that's a bad design. On the other hand, if you have white space, make sure it's purposeful. Don't leave too much white space, and don't just leave it because you're lazy. And again, that deals with the headline space, but also deals with overall. I've had students who have just, they got to the end of the story, they ran out of story, and they just left a big block of white space there. Well, you can't do that. That's where you might create a pull-out quote or make your photo bigger. Your photo does not have to stay within the columns. It can be 2.5 columns wide. It could be, it could be some portion. It doesn't have to be exact. So you can play with your art a little bit, especially in desktop publishing. We used to not be able to do it very well, but now we can with desktop publishing. So you can have your art move into the text space a little bit and have the text wrap around it. So there are different things you can do, put in subheadlines, different things to do to fill the spot, but you do not leave a big blank box. That you don't do. So fill the space unless it's very purposely left, white space. It has to make good design. And finally, don't tombstone. Again, lots of the front pages that you will see, I do not like because they have too many lines. There are some newspapers now putting lines every place, absolutely every place, down every column and across, and it makes no sense to me whatsoever. When I first started at the daily newspaper, as I said, we had a special design editor. He was a very good design editor. And after he left, we didn't replace him. All of us had to basically try to be as good as him. All the copy editors hopefully had learned the rules that he set up for us, but also learned his art, the art of newspaper design. And so I still use his rules because I still think his rules were better than any I've seen at any newspaper. And being at a medium, I don't know where he went to after that, but I'm sure he moved up and had a very brilliant career because he was very, very good. But one of his rules was if you have two stories next to each other, not only are you eliminating tombstoning of one headline next to the other headline, but you're also eliminating any possible confusion, which comes with tombstoning, but also comes with other things, if you simply box one of those stories. And typically it's the bigger story you box. The bigger story because it has art in it, and it just looks better to put the box around the story with art in it, especially if it's a fairly good sized piece of art. So you end up boxing one, and with that one box, you can pretty much do away with all of the lines. You find that once you find that if you box one large story on your page, even in a full page, even a full broadsheet, typically that's enough that you no longer need any other lines. And now we have all these newspapers putting lines all over the place because they don't keep that one rule. Sometimes you have to have a second box on a page, maybe of a one column. So you might have a box around in a tabloid around a 4-column story towards the upper left, and now you may have to box a story in the lower right in order to prevent tombstoning there. Something like that. But basically 2 boxes on a page are the most you ever have to have to break that up and eliminate all of this inclination now of putting lines every place, which to me is absurd. Anyway, so that's all I'm going to cover today. But I just want to give you some ideas, some of the stuff you need to be thinking about. We will get into desktop publishing next week. We have the license, but they were having some trouble getting it downloaded for some reason. I don't exactly understand what problem they're having. But hopefully, we will have it next week. Now that causes a problem, however, for some of you who are assigned to teach us next week how to do the desktop publishing. You're able to look at videos, but you're not, unless you download a trial subscription yourself, which you can do, by the way. It's quite easy to download a 1-week trial subscription. So that would mean that at least by this weekend, you'd want to go to quark.com and download a trial subscription onto your computer. I have it on mine right now. And then be able to create if you start your 1-week subscription on Friday, let's say, then it will last till the following Thursday. So you would have time to prepare your presentation and deliver it with your trial subscription. We may have to trade computers. You have to bring your computer, and because my trial subscription will run out by then. I was actually doing a professional project, doing the cover for a book, and so I decided I would do it with Quark, and I didn't have anything better than that currently. So I downloaded it for professional reasons, but now my subscription is going to run out. So hopefully they'll get this solved, and we will all have access. They do plan to put Quark not only in this room, but also on the Windows-based computers in the B building, the B1 building. And so if you really prefer Windows, you could do some work on the Windows-based computers. There will be Quark in those computer labs. But it's going to be kind of hard to work around not using these computers when you're in this classroom. So I would, in the syllabus, there are videos, video links, both to the Quark software, but also to Apple. So if you're not comfortable with these Apple computers, I would suggest it'd be good for you to get comfortable with them anyway. It's good to have skills in both Windows and Apple. I'm not fully comfortable with them myself yet, and that's why I'm using my laptop, so that I don't have to think here in front of you and make mistakes and so forth. But I have to get comfortable with it also. I did use it when I was at the daily newspaper. We used big Macintosh computers with Quark Express then. And so but that was a long time ago. So I have to get comfortable again with Apple, as well as some of you. Okay, well, let's, we have about 45 minutes or so, 45 minutes for you guys to help each other on your stories. I asked you to bring your stories and a copy of your photos so people can critique them. If you didn't print them out, then you could maybe, if you can access them on the computer or whatever. But this is your chance to help each other and be each other's editor. And before you give me your final product by next Monday morning. So starting next week, I will not only be grading your final product, but also will start using them at least by the following week in design. I'll start breaking them up into groups and saying, okay, I can fit these in one broadsheet page, I can fit these other ones in another broadsheet page, and each of you will have different stories to work with when you're doing your broadsheet or any of your 3 design projects that are major projects. In the final exam, you'll all have the same stories, but in the projects, you'll have different stories. You'll have different challenges. And in some of your projects, you may have more difficult stories to deal with than in some other projects. I'm not going to give you the same stories for every project. I'm going to give you different stories for every project, and so that you have different challenges. You have to re-edit the stories with new stories, like I say, to complete your next assignment. You'll have once we start, you'll have about 3 weeks between each project. So it's not a short time, but it's not a long time either. So we'll be starting here pretty soon, start working on the first project. And the new syllabus tells you when that's due, but so it's still a few weeks away. It's after the break, I know that. So looking down the revised syllabus, your major project 2 is due in, well, it'll actually be like the first day of week 10. I say it's week 9, but I'll probably give you till the Monday morning or something. But in essence, you'll be working on it in week 9, and it'll be due early morning week 10. And then, like I say, that's your major project 2. Your major project 3 will be, it's listed here as week 12, but it'll be early Monday morning, week 13. And then your last project is week 15, which, again, if I can, I'll give you till early Monday morning of week 16, which we don't really have a week 16, but your final week. I'll give you that weekend if you need that. So you have 3 major projects coming up, about 3 weeks in between them. Once you get used to desktop publishing, you'll find it goes faster and faster. And probably the easiest ones are the magazines, which are your last one now. I've revised the order, so your magazine pages will be the last ones. And that magazine pages are some of the simplest ones. So that one you should be able to kick out in advance of your final exams to get it done with fairly quickly. Any questions? If not, then go ahead and meet with your peers in group any way you want to. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I would suggest that you go find a group. If you're sitting by yourself someplace, go find another group and share your stories and help each other improve your stories. I will be up here. I'll sit up here on the front desk here in a second, and if you want to bring me something to look at, to the degree I have time, I will give a glance to it. I'm not going to copy edit your story for you, so don't ask me to do that, but I'll look at the lead, I'll look at the first few paragraphs, answer specific questions you have, if you have some specific questions for me. Okay? Go for it.